Undercover boss orders breakfast platter, freezes when waitress says staff secretly spied. Daniel Reed adjusted the worn baseball cap lower over his eyes as he pushed through the glass door of Miller's diner. The bell above chimed, a sound he'd chosen himself 15 years ago when he opened the first location. Back then, he'd imagined that cheerful ring would always signal hope and opportunity. Now, at 6:47 on a cold Monday morning, it felt like a warning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow across the checkered floor. Daniel had built 12 of these diners across 3 states, each one a carbon copy of the original dream: affordable comfort food, fair wages, and a place where communities gathered. But this branch, Location 7 in Millbrook, had been hemorrhaging money for 8 months straight. Worse, 3 employees had quit without notice in the past 6 weeks. Daniel slid into a back booth, the cracked vinyl seats squeaking beneath him. He wore a faded blue jacket with Greyhound Transit stitched across the pocket, a costume he'd borrowed from an actual bus driver friend. His usual tailored suits and polished shoes were replaced with scuffed work boots and jeans. Even his posture had changed. He slouched slightly, looking tired, forgettable, invisible. The diner was nearly empty. An elderly man nursed coffee at the counter. A trucker sat by the window, scrolling through his phone. The kitchen clanged with the sound of someone scraping a griddle, but there was something off about the atmosphere, a heaviness that Daniel couldn't quite name. Then he saw her. The waitress approached his table with a coffee pot, her name tag reading, Anna, in faded letters. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with dark circles under her eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. But it was her hands that caught Daniel's attention first. They trembled slightly as she poured his coffee. "Morning," she said, her voice flat. "What can I get you?" Daniel glanced at the laminated menu, though he memorized every item on it years ago. "I'll take the breakfast platter special. Extra bacon if that's all right." "Sure thing," Anna scribbled on her pad without making eye contact. As she turned to leave, Daniel noticed her glance toward the kitchen, then quickly at the ceiling corner near the entrance. Her jaw tightened. Something flickered in her expression. Fear? Anger? He couldn't tell. 10 minutes later, she returned with his plate: scrambled eggs, hash browns, bacon, and wheat toast. The food looked decent enough, better than the complaints suggested it should be. She set it down carefully, then did something unexpected. She leaned in, pretending to adjust the silverware. "Please don't talk loudly," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen again. "Staff are secretly spied on." Daniel's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. He looked up at her, but Anna had already straightened, her face blank and professional again. She pulled out her order pad and said in a normal voice, "Anything else I can get you, sir?" His heart hammered against his ribs. "Staff are secretly spied on." The words repeated in his mind like an alarm bell. "No, thank you," he managed to say calmly. "This looks great." Anna nodded and walked away, her shoulders stiff. Daniel forced himself to pick up his fork and take a bite of eggs, though he barely tasted them. His mind raced. He'd come here based on anonymous tips sent to his corporate email, vague complaints about unfair treatment and stolen wages. His CFO had wanted to send auditors. His lawyer suggested firing the branch manager and starting fresh. But Daniel had learned long ago that numbers on a spreadsheet never told the full story. He needed to see it himself, to understand what was really happening to his people. Now, sitting in this booth with cold dread settling in his stomach, he realized the situation might be far worse than anyone had imagined. He ate slowly, deliberately, watching everything. A young cook emerged from the kitchen to refill the coffee station. The kid couldn't have been older than 22, with a spotty beard and nervous energy. As he passed the manager's office, a small room with a window overlooking the dining area, he visibly flinched. Daniel followed his gaze. Through the window, he could see a man in his late 40s sitting at a desk, arms crossed, watching the dining room like a hawk. He had graying hair, a thick neck, and the kind of permanent scowl that came from years of bitterness. This had to be Rick Lawson, the branch manager. Daniel had hired him 3 years ago based on a glowing recommendation from a colleague. On paper, Rick was efficient. Sales had initially improved under his management. Costs were trimmed. The books balanced. But Daniel had missed something. Something important. Rick's eyes swept across the diner, pausing on each employee with cold calculation. When his gaze landed on Anna, she immediately busied herself wiping down an already clean table. Daniel looked away, pretending to focus on his food. But his attention was elsewhere now, on the details he'd overlooked before. Small black objects mounted near the ceiling vents. At first, they looked like smoke detectors, but the angles were wrong. They were pointed at the floor, at the workstations, at the places where employees gathered. Cameras. His own diner had cameras, every business did, but these were different. There were too many of them, positioned in strange places. One above the staff break room door. Another near the employee time clock. A third tucked under a shelf near the kitchen entrance, barely visible. Daniel's jaw clenched. He set down his fork, appetite gone. Anna returned to refill his coffee. As she poured, her hand shook harder than before. A drop splashed onto the table. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly. He waited until she met his eyes. "How long?" She understood immediately what he was asking. Her face paled, but she didn't look away. 8 months, she breathed. "Please." "Don't ask more." "Not here." Then she was gone again, disappearing behind the counter. 8 months. The exact timeline when this location's problems had started. Daniel pulled out his phone, angling it low beneath the table as if checking messages. Instead, he opened the camera and discreetly photographed the nearest black device on the ceiling. The image was grainy, but clear enough. He'd send it to his security consultant later. The elderly man at the counter stood to leave, dropping a few bills on the formica. As he shuffled toward the door, Rick emerged from his office. "Morning, Mr. Patterson," Rick said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "See you tomorrow?" "Maybe," the old man muttered, not looking back. Rick's smile vanished the instant the door closed. He turned toward the kitchen and barked, "Marcus! Those dishes better be done before the lunch rush, or you're clocking out early. Without pay." A muffled, "Yes, sir," came from the back. Daniel's hands curled into fists under the table. Without pay. That wasn't just bad management, it was illegal. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. He couldn't blow his cover. Not yet. If Rick discovered who he really was, any evidence would disappear. People would be silenced. The truth would be buried under legal paperwork and corporate PR. No. Daniel needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Anna approached with his check, setting it face down on the table. As she did, Daniel noticed something, a slight bulge in her apron pocket, the corner of what looked like a folded napkin peeking out. She caught him looking and gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Daniel left cash on the table, a generous tip that Anna would likely never see, and stood to leave. As he walked toward the exit, he felt Rick's eyes following him from the office window. The bell chimed as Daniel stepped into the cold morning air. He climbed into his rented sedan and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Staff are secretly spied on. Anna's desperate whisper echoed in his mind. In that moment, Daniel Reed made a decision. He wasn't leaving Millbrook. He wasn't sending lawyers or auditors or investigators. He was going back inside that diner. And he wasn't leaving until he uncovered every secret Rick Lawson was hiding. Even if it meant destroying everything Daniel had built to save what really mattered, the people who'd trusted him. The real investigation was just beginning. Daniel didn't go far. He drove 3 blocks, parked behind a laundromat, and waited 30 minutes before returning to Miller's diner on foot. This time, he entered through the side door near the restrooms, the entrance employees used during shift changes. Nobody questioned him. He looked like any other working-class customer seeking coffee and a quiet corner. The lunch crowd had started trickling in. Daniel chose a different booth, this one with a clear view of the kitchen pass-through window and Rick's office. He ordered coffee and pie from a different waitress, a teenager named Sophie who looked even more anxious than Anna. "Just the apple, thanks," Daniel said gently. Sophie nodded quickly and hurried away, nearly colliding with the young cook he'd seen earlier. The kid, Marcus, Rick had called him, was carrying a tray of clean glasses. His hands shook as he set them on the counter. Daniel watched over the rim of his coffee cup. The dynamic was all wrong. In a healthy restaurant, there was rhythm, organized chaos, yes, but also banter, small jokes, the occasional laugh during a lull. Daniel had worked in kitchens himself as a teenager. He knew what normal looked like. This wasn't it. Everyone moved like they were walking on eggshells. Sophie kept glancing at the manager's office. Marcus worked with his head down, never making eye contact with anyone. Even the line cook, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, worked in complete silence, flipping burgers with mechanical precision. Then Rick emerged from his office. The change was immediate. Sophie straightened. Marcus froze mid-step. Anna, who'd been writing down an order at a nearby table, visibly tensed. Rick walked through the diner slowly, hands in his pockets, surveying his domain. He paused at the kitchen window, watching the line cook work. She didn't acknowledge him, but Daniel saw her jaw clench. "Table 6 needs their check," Rick said flatly. "You're moving too slow today, Carol." "Yes, sir," Carol replied without looking up. Rick's eyes swept the dining room, cataloging every detail. When his gaze passed over Daniel, there was no recognition, just the cold assessment of another faceless customer. Then something happened that made Daniel's blood run cold. Marcus, carrying a tray of dirty dishes toward the kitchen, stumbled slightly on the worn rubber mat. A single plate slid off the edge and shattered against the tile floor. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Marcus stood there, staring at the broken ceramic, his face draining of color. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." Rick was on him in 3 strides. "That's coming out of your paycheck," Rick said coldly. "And you're staying an extra hour tonight. Unpaid. Maybe that'll teach you to pay attention. But I have class tonight," Marcus stammered. "I can't miss." "Then don't break plates." Rick's voice was ice. "Clean it up. Now." Marcus dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he gathered the shards. A thin line of blood appeared on his thumb where a sharp edge had cut him, but he didn't stop. He just kept whispering. "Sorry, sorry, sorry." Daniel's grip tightened on his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up, to reveal himself, to fire Rick Lawson on the spot. But he couldn't. Not yet. Rick watched Marcus for another moment, then turned and walked back to his office. The door closed with a decisive click. Only then did Anna move. She grabbed the first aid kit from behind the counter and knelt beside Marcus, wrapping his thumb in gauze while he continued picking up broken ceramic with his other hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just breathe." Daniel forced himself to look away, to sip his coffee as if he'd seen nothing unusual. But his photographer's eye was working overtime now, cataloging everything. The black cameras weren't just near the vents and shelves. Now that he knew what to look for, he spotted more. One disguised as a clock above the employee time clock. Another tucked into a decorative plant near the break room. A third positioned to capture the entire counter area where tips were left. They're everywhere. And the angles, they weren't positioned for security. Regular security cameras watched entrances, exits, the register. These were pointed at workstations, at gathering spots, at places where employees talked to each other. These cameras were watching the staff, not protecting them. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from his CFO, board meeting moved to Thursday. Need your approval on Q4 projections. He silenced it. The corporate world felt very far away right now. Sophie approached with his pie, setting it down with shaking hands. As she turned to leave, Daniel noticed something. A small, fresh bruise on her forearm, partially hidden by her sleeve. "Sophie," he said quietly. She jumped. "You okay?" Her eyes went wide with something like panic. "I'm fine. Totally fine. Just clumsy." The words came out too fast, too rehearsed. Before Daniel could respond, she was gone. He sat there for another hour, watching, documenting everything mentally. Rick made 2 more rounds through the diner. Each time, the staff's fear was palpable. Carol burned an order and looked like she might cry when Rick noticed. Anna spilled water refilling a customer's glass and immediately grabbed a towel, cleaning it up before Rick could see. But the most damning moment came at 2:15 p.m. The lunch rush had ended. Most customers had left. Daniel watched through the pass-through window as Rick gathered the staff tip jar from the counter, a large glass container that had been moderately full. Rick took it into his office. When he emerged 5 minutes later, the jar was back on the counter. But it was noticeably emptier. At least $30 or $40 had vanished. Daniel's jaw clenched. Tip theft. Added to the wage violations, the surveillance, the intimidation, Rick wasn't just a bad manager. He was a predator. Daniel stood, leaving cash on the table. As he walked toward the exit, he caught Anna's eye. She gave him the smallest nod, then glanced deliberately at the old storage shed visible through the back window. "Meet me there," her eyes said. Daniel pushed through the door, the bell chiming his exit. But he wasn't leaving. Not even close. He was going to find out exactly how deep this route went. And then he was going to burn it out, root and branch. No matter what it cost him. Daniel circled the building, keeping to the shadows. The storage shed Anna had glanced at sat about 50 feet behind the diner, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and a rusted dumpster. He couldn't approach it now, not in broad daylight with Rick potentially watching from his office window. He needed a different strategy. 20 minutes later, Daniel re-entered the diner for the 3rd time that day. The dinner shift was starting, and new faces were clocking in, a young man with headphones around his neck, an older woman with gray streaks in her hair. They all wore the same haunted expression. Daniel took a seat at the counter this time, directly across from the coffee station. From here, he had a clear view of the narrow hallway that led to the employee break room and the back exit. Anna was refilling napkin dispensers. When she saw him, something flickered in her eyes, surprise, then worry, then a barely perceptible nod. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Please," Daniel watched her pour. "Long day." "Tell me about it," she replied, but there was weight behind those words that had nothing to do with tired feet. The dinner crowd was lighter than lunch. A family with 2 small children. A couple on what looked like a first date. A construction worker eating alone. Daniel nursed his coffee, pretending to scroll through his phone while his attention remained locked on the staff. At 6:30 p.m., the break room door opened. Marcus emerged, followed by Sophie and Carol. They'd been on break together, 15 minutes mandated by law, though Daniel suspected Rick found ways to cut even that short. But they'd been talking. He could see it in their body language, the way Marcus's shoulders were less hunched, how Carol's expression had softened slightly. Whatever they'd discussed in that break room, it had been important. Daniel stood, stretched, and walked casually toward the restroom hallway. The break room door was slightly ajar. As he passed, moving slowly, he heard voices. 2 employees were inside now, the young man with headphones and another worker Daniel hadn't seen before, a woman in her 40s wearing a hairnet. "I'm telling you, Denise, we need to be careful," the young man was saying. His voice was hushed, urgent. "Remember what happened to Tommy? Tommy complained once about his tips being short," Denise replied bitterly. "One complaint. Rick fired him the next week, said he was stealing from the register. Tommy worked here for 3 years and never stole a damn thing. And Lisa?" She mentioned the cameras to a customer, just casually. "Gone within a month. Rick said she failed a performance review." Daniel's pulse quickened. He pretended to tie his shoe, staying low, listening. "How many people has he pushed out?" Denise asked. 7. 7 people in 8 months. All the senior staff who knew their rights, who weren't afraid to speak up. He replaces them with kids like Sophie who are too scared to fight back. Those recordings. Sure. The young man's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Not here. You know he listens. Silence. Then footsteps approaching the door. Daniel quickly moved toward the restroom, slipping inside just as the break room door opened fully. Through the crack, he watched the two employees emerge, their faces carefully blank again, masks sliding back into place. When he returned to the counter, Anna was waiting. She set down a fresh coffee he hadn't ordered. Tucked beneath the saucer was a folded napkin. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then she was gone, moving to another customer. Daniel's heart hammered. He waited until no one was looking, then palmed the napkin and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He forced himself to finish his coffee slowly, to pay his check, to walk out like any normal customer. Only when he was back in his car, parked in the darkening lot, did he unfold the napkin. The handwriting was small, cramped, written in rush pencil. Hidden cameras above exit and restroom hallway. They listened too. Audio recording devices in break room, near time clock, above booth 7. Rick reviews footage every night. Fired 7 workers in 8 months, all who complained about missing tips, reduced pay, forced unpaid overtime, being watched. He keeps files on everyone. Personal info. Phone records somehow. We think he hacked the Wi-Fi. Can't prove it. Can't report it, he'll know. He always knows. Please help us. We're trapped. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. His hands shook with barely contained rage. Audio devices. Hacked Wi-Fi. Personal information. This wasn't just workplace surveillance, it was systematic invasion of privacy, likely illegal on multiple counts. Rick was building profiles on his employees, finding leverage, manufacturing reasons to fire anyone who threatened his control. And the people he targeted weren't random. They were senior staff. Experienced workers who knew labor laws, who understood their rights, who had worked for Daniel long enough to know this wasn't how his company operated. Rick was systematically purging anyone who might resist. The younger, more vulnerable employees who remained, Sophie with her bruises, Marcus with his college classes he couldn't afford to miss, they were perfect victims. Desperate enough to need the job, scared enough to stay silent. Daniel pulled out his phone and photographed the napkin, then sent it to his encrypted cloud storage. Evidence. He needed mountains of it before he could move. His phone buzzed. A text from Anna, sent from an unknown number, storage shed. Tomorrow. 5 a.m. Before Rick arrives. I'll show you everything. Daniel typed back, I'll be there. Then he sat in his car as darkness fell completely, watching the diner's lights glow against the night sky. Somewhere inside, Anna was serving tables, probably terrified of what morning would bring. Marcus was washing dishes with a bandaged thumb. Carol was grilling burgers, counting down the minutes until she could escape. And Rick Lawson sat in his office, watching them all on his screens, listening to their whispered conversations, tightening his grip. Daniel had built this company on a simple principle: treat people with dignity, and they'll give you their best. Rick had perverted that into something monstrous. Tomorrow, Daniel would see exactly how deep the route went. And then he would cut it out, no matter how much it hurt, no matter what it cost. Some things were worth burning down to rebuild right. This was one of them. Daniel barely slept. He spent the night in a cheap motel 2 miles from the diner, reviewing everything he'd witnessed, building a mental case file. At 4:45 a.m., he drove through the empty streets of Millbrook, parking a block away from Miller's diner. The town was still asleep. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Daniel approached the diner on foot, his breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. Anna was already there, standing near the storage shed. She wore jeans and a heavy jacket, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the dim light, she looked even more exhausted than before. "You came," she said quietly. "I gave you my word." Daniel glanced toward the diner. Dark windows stared back. When does Rick arrive? 6:30 usually. We have time, but not much. Anna pulled a key from her pocket, old brass, worn smooth. I've been holding on to this for 3 weeks. Ever since I found out what he was keeping out here. She unlocked the shed's padlock with trembling hands. The door creaked open, revealing a cramped space filled with old equipment, spare chairs, and boxes of supplies. But Anna moved past all of it, heading to the back corner where a large plastic storage container sat hidden beneath a tarp. Help me, she said. Together, they pulled the container into the light. Anna opened the lid, and Daniel's stomach dropped. Inside were stacks of manila folders, each labeled with an employee's name. USB drives. A small portable hard drive. Printed transcripts bound with rubber bands. Screenshots of text messages. Photos of employees taken without their knowledge, in the parking lot, at the time clock, during breaks. Oh my God! Daniel breathed. Anna pulled out one of the folders. This is Marcus. She opened it. Inside were printed schedules, disciplinary reports for minor infractions, and something that made Daniel's blood run cold, transcripts of private conversations Marcus had with other employees. One conversation, dated 3 weeks ago. Marcus, I can't keep doing this. He cut my hours again, and I'm already struggling with tuition. Sophie, can't you report him? Marcus, to who? Corporate? They're 1,000 miles away. They don't care about us. Daniel's jaw clenched. They're 1,000 miles away. They don't care. That's what his employees believed. That he didn't care. Anna pulled out another folder. This is Tommy, the one who got fired. Look, she showed Daniel a transcript from the break room, dated the day before Tommy's termination. Tommy, my tips have been short for 3 weeks straight. Something's not right. I'm going to talk to Rick about it. Carol, be careful. You know how he gets. Tommy, I've been here 3 years. I know my rights. He can't just steal from us. Beneath the transcript was a termination notice claiming Tommy had been caught stealing from the register. Time-stamped security footage was referenced as evidence, footage Daniel knew he'd never seen, footage that likely didn't exist or had been manipulated. Rick manufactures evidence, Anna explained, her voice shaking. He listens to us, waits for someone to complain or question him, then builds a case to fire them. The audio recordings give him everything he needs. He knows exactly what we're thinking, what we're planning. Daniel rifled through more folders. Lisa, the employee mentioned in the break room conversation. Her folder contained screenshots of personal text messages from her phone. Messages to her husband about looking for another job, about how much she hated working under Rick's surveillance. How did he get phone records? Daniel demanded. The Wi-Fi. Anna pulled out a printed document, network logs, IP addresses, data packets. One of the cooks, Miguel, used to work in IT before he moved here. He checked his phone one day and found spyware installed. He thinks Rick set up a fake Wi-Fi network that looks like the restaurant's official one. When we connect to it, he can access our phones. That's illegal. Completely illegal. We know. But we can't prove he did it. And if we accuse him without proof, we're next on his list. Anna's voice cracked. Miguel quit 2 weeks after he found the spyware. Didn't even give notice. Just left, and never came back. Daniel pulled out his phone and began photographing everything, every folder, every transcript, every screenshot. His hands moved quickly, methodically, years of business discipline taking over. Anna handed him USB drives. These have the audio files. Months of recordings from the break room, the kitchen, even the parking lot. He has microphones everywhere. As Daniel worked, Anna kept talking, the words pouring out like she'd been holding them in for too long. He doesn't just steal tips. He manipulates schedules to force people into unpaid overtime, then docks their pay if they refuse. He threatens to call immigration on anyone who questions him, even though half the staff are citizens. He knows our weaknesses, who has student loans, who's a single parent, who can't afford to lose this job. She pulled out another document, a spreadsheet. This is his tracking sheet. He rates us on compliance. The more compliant you are, the more hours you get. Question him once, and your hours get cut. Question him twice, and he starts building your termination file. Daniel stared at the spreadsheet. Every employee was listed. Next to each name was a color code: green for compliant, yellow for watching, red for termination track. Anna's name was yellow. Marcus was yellow. Sophie, surprisingly, was green, probably because she was too terrified to resist. 7 names were crossed out entirely. The fired workers. Why didn't you come forward before? Daniel asked quietly. Why didn't anyone report this to corporate? Anna's laugh was bitter. 2 people tried. Rachel called the corporate hotline 6 months ago. A week later, Rick called her into his office and played a recording of her phone call. He knew every word she'd said. She quit that day. And the second person? David. He sent an email to corporate HR. Rick intercepted it somehow. We think he has access to our work email accounts. David was fired for performance issues the next morning. Daniel closed his eyes. His company, the business he'd built on trust and integrity, had become a prison for these people. And the systems he'd put in place to protect them had been corrupted by one man's cruelty. Anna, he said slowly, I need to get all of this out of here. Can you help me carry it to my car? If Rick finds out. He won't. Not yet. They worked quickly, loading folders and drives into Daniel's car. The sky was beginning to lighten, dawn creeping across the horizon. As they finished, Anna grabbed his arm. Please tell me you can do something. Please tell me this wasn't for nothing. Daniel met her eyes. I promise you this ends soon. She nodded, though fear still clouded her face. I need to go. My shift starts in an hour. Anna, thank you. You're incredibly brave. I'm terrified, she admitted. But someone had to do something. She disappeared around the building, heading toward her car in the employee lot. Daniel stood there for a moment, the container of evidence secure in his trunk, watching the diner as lights began to flicker on inside. Rick would arrive in 30 minutes. He'd review his footage from yesterday, listen to his recordings, continue his reign of terror. But his time was running out. Daniel had the evidence now. Tomorrow he'd bring back up people Rick couldn't intimidate or silence. And then the reckoning would begin. Daniel had just closed his trunk when he heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel, coming from the wrong direction. His heart stopped. A black SUV pulled into the employee lot, 30 minutes earlier than expected. Through the windshield, Daniel recognized Rick Lawson's scowling face. Their eyes met for a brief, terrible second. Rick's expression transformed from surprise to fury. Daniel forced himself to walk casually toward the front of the building, like any early morning customer. But his pulse hammered in his ears. Had Rick seen him at the shed? Had he noticed the open trunk? He rounded the corner just as he heard a car door slam. Hey! Rick's voice echoed across the parking lot. You there? Stop! Daniel kept walking, pulling out his phone as if checking messages. He couldn't run, that would confirm suspicion. He had to maintain his cover as a nobody, a bus driver grabbing breakfast before his shift. Footsteps behind him, rapid and angry. I said stop! Rick grabbed Daniel's shoulder, spinning him around. Up close, Rick was bigger than he'd appeared through the office window, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive posture that came from years of unchecked authority. What were you doing back there? Back where? Daniel kept his voice even, slightly confused. I was just walking from my car, man. I saw you near the storage shed. I parked in the back lot. Didn't think it mattered. Daniel shrugged, playing dumb. Store's not even open yet. I was just heading around to check. Rick studied him, eyes narrowing. You were here yesterday. All day. I saw you on the cameras. Yeah? Good coffee. Daniel met his gaze without flinching. That a problem? What's your name? Tom, the lie came easily. Tom Bryant. I drive the 6 a.m. route to Pittsburgh. This is my regular stop. Rick pulled out his phone, snapping a photo of Daniel before he could react. We'll see about that. If I find out you're lying. The diner's back door burst open. Anna stood there in her work uniform, eyes wide with panic barely contained. Rick! Morning. You're here early. Rick's attention snapped to her. Why are you here already? Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd prep the coffee station before the rush. Her voice was too bright, too forced. Everything okay out here? Go inside, Anna. Now. But Now. Anna's gaze flickered to Daniel for just a moment, a silent apology, a desperate warning, then she disappeared back inside. Rick turned back to Daniel. If I see you near that shed again, I'm calling the cops. Understand? Sure, whatever. Daniel held up his hands. Just wanted breakfast, man. Didn't mean to cause trouble. He walked away, every muscle tense, expecting Rick to grab him again. But the confrontation ended there. Daniel climbed into his car, started the engine, and forced himself to drive slowly out of the parking lot. In his rearview mirror, he watched Rick head straight for the storage shed. No, 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 Daniel whispered. Rick unlocked the shed and disappeared inside. Daniel was 3 blocks away when his phone buzzed, a text from Anna's unknown number. He knows. Moving fast. He's got the box. Daniel slammed his palm against the steering wheel. He'd photographed most of the evidence, but not all of it. And now Rick had the physical files, the hard drives, everything that could prove systematic abuse. Another text. He's bringing it to his office. Going to destroy it. Daniel's mind raced. If Rick destroyed that evidence, it would be Daniel's word, and his photos, against a manager who'd covered his tracks for 8 months. Rick could claim the documents were fabricated, that the disgruntled employees had set him up, that Daniel had a vendetta. Without the physical evidence, the case became murkier. Daniel pulled over, fingers flying across his phone. He called his head of security, James Chin, one of 3 people in the company he trusted absolutely. Daniel? It's 5:40 in the morning. James, I need you in Millbrook. Now. Today. Bring legal, bring HR, and bring someone who understands electronic surveillance law. What's going on? Branch 7. Worse than we thought. The manager's running an illegal surveillance operation, cameras, audio devices, phone hacking. He's been systematically firing senior staff and stealing wages. I have evidence, but he's about to destroy the physical files. A pause. You went undercover, didn't you? Yes. James sighed. Of course you did. All right, I'll mobilize a team. But Daniel, if he's destroying evidence right now, there's nothing we can do to stop him remotely. I know. Daniel watched the sunrise creep over the buildings. But he doesn't know who I am yet. He thinks I'm just some nosy bus driver. That gives us time. Time for what? To make him think he got away with it. If he believes he's safe, he'll keep operating. He'll keep watching his cameras, keep recording his employees. And when we walk in with our team, he'll be caught in the act. That's risky. If he figures out who you are. He won't. I'll stay away today, let things cool down. You get the team assembled. We move tomorrow morning. Daniel. These people are counting on us, James. They tried to report him, and he shut them down. They're trapped because they think we don't care. We have to prove them wrong. Another pause, longer this time. Okay. I'll have everyone there by tomorrow morning. But you stay out of that diner until we arrive. Promise me. I promise. Daniel ended the call and sat in his car, watching the town wake up around him. Lights flickered on in houses. A delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere, Anna was serving coffee with shaking hands, terrified that Rick had connected the dots. Another text came through. He's locked the box in his office. Put a new lock on it. He keeps looking at his phone. Your photo. Be careful. Daniel typed back. I'm okay. Stay calm. Help is coming. One more day. One more day feels like forever. I know. But this ends tomorrow. I promise you. He stared at the diner in the distance, just visible between buildings. Rick Lawson thought he'd won this round. He'd caught someone snooping, secured his evidence, and reinforced his control. But he'd made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated who was watching him back. Daniel Reed had built a company on the principle that people mattered most. Rick had twisted that into a system of fear and exploitation. Tomorrow, with witnesses and legal authority behind him, Daniel would tear that system apart. And Rick would finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. One more day. Then the mask would come off, and the real confrontation would begin. Daniel spent Tuesday hidden in his motel room, monitoring the situation remotely. Anna sent periodic updates, brief, coded texts that confirmed Rick was on high alert but hadn't connected Tom Bryant to the company owner. Manager watching everyone closer. Asked about you twice. Played it off like I barely noticed you. He's reviewing old footage. Paranoid. Staff meeting called for tomorrow 9 a.m. Mandatory. He never does meetings. That last message made Daniel's instincts flare. Rick was consolidating control, reminding everyone who held power. It was exactly the opportunity Daniel needed. Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray. At 7:30 a.m., Daniel stood in the parking lot of a Holiday Inn 3 miles from the diner, watching 2 vehicles pull in. The first was a rental sedan. James Chin emerged, 52, former Marine, with silver-streaked hair and the calm intensity of someone who'd seen real danger. He'd been Daniel's head of security for 9 years. The second was a van. Out stepped Margaret Torres, the company's chief legal counsel, and David Kim, an HR director Daniel trusted implicitly. The fourth person was someone Daniel had specifically requested, Sarah Mendez, a security consultant who specialized in illegal surveillance cases. "You look terrible," James said by way of greeting. "Didn't sleep much." Daniel shook his hand. "Thanks for coming." Margaret set down her briefcase. "James briefed us on the flight. This is serious, Daniel. If even half of what you've described is true, we're looking at multiple felonies, wiretapping, wage theft, computer fraud. It's all true. I have photos of the evidence, and I witnessed the tip theft personally." Daniel pulled out his phone, showing them the images he'd taken in the storage shed. "But he locked the physical files away yesterday. We need to catch him with the surveillance system active." Sarah studied the photos, her expression darkening. "These audio device placements are sophisticated. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. Someone planned this installation carefully. And the Wi-Fi network spoofing? That requires technical knowledge. Can we prove it?" David asked. "If the system's still running, yes. I'll need access to the building's network infrastructure and the devices themselves." Sarah looked at Daniel. "You said there's a mandatory staff meeting this morning?" 9 a.m. Rick called it yesterday. "Perfect. He'll have the surveillance active. He won't be able to resist watching a room full of employees he's trying to control. That's when we move." They spent the next hour reviewing strategy. Margaret outlined the legal approach: secure the evidence first, interview employees separately, document everything for potential criminal charges. David prepared protocols for supporting staff who'd been victimized. James coordinated with local authorities, just in case Rick became violent. At 8:45 a.m., they drove to Miller's Diner in 2 vehicles. Daniel rode with James, his stomach tight with anticipation. "You sure you want to do this publicly?" James asked. "We could handle it privately, avoid the spectacle." "No," Daniel's voice was firm. "These employees have been gaslit and terrorized for months. They need to see him exposed. They need to know they were right to be afraid, that they're not crazy, that what happened to them was real and wrong." James nodded slowly. "You always did care too much about the human element. It's not too much if it's the right amount." They parked out of sight. Through the diner windows, Daniel could see employees gathering: Anna, Marcus, Sophie, Carol, and others whose names he'd learned from the files. They looked nervous, whispering to each other while Rick stood at the front near the counter, arms crossed, radiating authority. At exactly 9 a.m., Daniel's team entered. The bell chimed. Rick looked up, irritation crossing his face at the interruption, then confusion as 5 professional-looking strangers walked in. His eyes landed on Daniel last. Recognition flickered. Then doubt. The scruffy bus driver was gone. Daniel wore a tailored suit now, his posture straight, his expression cold and focused. "We're closed for a staff meeting," Rick said tersely. "You'll need to come back." "Rick Lawson?" Margaret stepped forward, her voice cutting. "I'm Margaret Torres, legal counsel for Reed Restaurant Group. This is James Chin, head of security, David Kim from HR, and Sarah Mendez, our security consultant. We're here to conduct an immediate investigation into this location." The color drained from Rick's face. His eyes shot to Daniel, really seeing him now. "Who are you?" Daniel stepped forward. "We met yesterday. Though I wasn't entirely honest about my name." Around the room, employees were standing frozen, confused. Anna's hand had flown to her mouth. "You have no authority to..." Rick started. "Actually," Daniel said quietly, "I have all the authority. My name is Daniel Reed. I own this company. And I'm shutting this location down effective immediately while we investigate your operation." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Anna gasped. Marcus's eyes went wide. Sophie started crying silently. Carol sank into the nearest chair, her face showing something between relief and disbelief. Rick's expressions cycled rapidly through shock, rage, and calculation. You can't just, I run a tight ship here. If some employees complained about discipline, that's... Sarah, Daniel said, not breaking eye contact with Rick. Please check the surveillance system. Sarah moved past Rick toward the office. He lurched forward to block her, but James stepped smoothly into his path, 6 feet of former military authority that made Rick think twice. You're not going in there, Rick said, his voice rising. That's private property, you need a warrant. It's company property, Margaret corrected. And Mr. Reed, as owner, has full legal access. You can cooperate, or we can call the police to escort you out while we conduct our investigation. Your choice. Rick's jaw worked soundlessly. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Around the room, employees watched with mounting hope, hardly daring to breathe. Sarah emerged from the office moments later, holding a tablet. Systems active. Currently recording audio from 12 devices throughout the building, including this room. Video surveillance on 19 cameras, with 8 positioned in areas that clearly violate privacy expectations. And there's a network device running a spoof of the company Wi-Fi. It's been collecting data from any phone that connects. She turned the tablet toward Rick. On the screen was a live feed, multiple camera angles of the dining room, including one pointed directly at where the staff stood. That's... Rick's voice cracked. That's for security purposes. Every business has. Every business doesn't record private conversations in break rooms. Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. Every business doesn't hack employee phones. Every business doesn't systematically fire workers who complain about stolen wages. Rick's face flushed red. You don't understand how hard it is to manage people like this. They're lazy, they steal, they... Stop talking. Margaret's command cut through his excuses. Anything you say now can and will be used in legal proceedings. Mr. Lawson, you're terminated effective immediately. You'll surrender your keys, your access codes, and you'll leave this property within 5 minutes. You can't fire me. I have rights, I have a contract. Your contract contains a morality clause. Margaret continued coolly. Criminal activity voids it entirely. And trust me, Mr. Lawson, what you've done here is extremely criminal. Rick looked around wildly, searching for support, for sympathy, for any foothold. He found none. The employees stared back at him with expressions ranging from fear to barely suppressed joy. His kingdom was crumbling, and he knew it. This isn't over. Rick hissed at Daniel. I'll sue, I'll. James, Daniel said simply. James moved forward, and Rick finally backed down, fumbling with his keys. He threw them on the counter with a clatter, shot one last venomous look at Anna, and stormed toward the exit. At the door, he turned back. "You all deserve what you get." He spat at the staff. "Every single one of you." Then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Daniel stood at the front of the diner, facing 12 employees who looked like they just witnessed something impossible. Anna's hand still covered her mouth. Marcus gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles had turned white. Sophie was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. Carol sat motionless, staring at Daniel like she was seeing a ghost. "I know you have questions," Daniel began, his voice gentle. "And I'm going to answer all of them. But first I need you to understand something." He took off his baseball cap, the last remnant of his disguise, and set it on the counter. "My name is Daniel Reed. 15 years ago, I opened the first Miller's Diner with money I'd saved working construction jobs and waiting tables. I wanted to build something that treated people right, good food, fair wages, and dignity. That was the promise I made to myself and to everyone who worked for me." Anna's hand slowly lowered from her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I failed you," Daniel continued, his voice cracking slightly. "All of you. For 8 months, you've been working in a nightmare, and I didn't know. Or I didn't know the extent of it. By the time rumors reached me, Rick Lawson had already built a system designed to keep you silent and scared. You were the bus driver," Carol said suddenly, her voice hoarse. "Monday. You were sitting right there." She pointed at the back booth. "Yes. I came undercover because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. And what I saw..." Daniel paused, steadying himself. "What I saw was the worst violation of trust I've ever witnessed in my professional life." Marcus finally spoke, his voice shaking. "You saw him threaten me. When I broke the plate. I did. I also saw him steal from the tip jar. I saw all of you flinch every time he walked by. I saw the fear in your eyes." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "And I saw the cameras. All of them." A collective intake of breath. "You knew?" Sophie whispered. "Anna warned me. On Monday morning, when she brought my breakfast." Daniel's eyes found Anna's. "She risked everything to tell a complete stranger that something was wrong. That took extraordinary courage." Anna's face crumpled. She pressed her hands to her eyes, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "She showed me evidence," Daniel continued. "Files Rick kept on every one of you. Recordings of your private conversations. Screenshots of your personal text messages. A spreadsheet where he rated you on how compliant you were." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the group. "He's been systematically firing senior employees, people who knew their rights, who weren't afraid to speak up, and replacing them with younger workers he thought he could control. He stole your tips. He forced you to work unpaid overtime. He hacked your phones through a fake Wi-Fi network. And he recorded everything you said, looking for excuses to get rid of anyone who threatened his power." "Tommy," Carol said, her voice breaking. "And Lisa. And Rachel. They didn't do anything wrong. No, they didn't. Rick manufactured evidence against them. I've seen the files. They were fired because they questioned him, not because they did anything wrong." Marcus sank into a chair. "We tried to tell someone. David, he emailed corporate. He was fired the next day." "I know." Rick intercepted the email. "He had access to your work accounts." Daniel's jaw tightened. "He made sure no one could reach me. He made you believe that corporate didn't care, that I didn't care. But you were never the problem. The system was compromised from the inside." Sophie wiped her eyes. "Why didn't you just fire him on Monday? Why wait?" "Because I needed evidence that would hold up in court. Rick is smart, he covered his tracks. If I'd fired him without proof, he could have destroyed everything and claimed you were lying. I needed witnesses, documentation, and legal authority." Daniel gestured to his team. "That's why I brought them. Margaret is our chief legal counsel. David handles HR, James runs security. And Sarah is an expert in surveillance cases. They've spent the morning documenting everything." Sarah held up the tablet. We have all the proof we need. The surveillance system is illegal on multiple counts. The phone hacking is a federal crime. The wage theft and intimidation are prosecutable offenses. Rick Lawson is finished. A stunned silence followed. Then Anna stood up. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to walk forward until she stood directly in front of Daniel. Why? She asked, her voice raw. Why did you do this yourself? You could have sent lawyers. You could have shut us down and moved on. Why did you come here and risk? Her voice broke. Why did you care? Daniel met her eyes. Because this company is nothing without the people who run it. You're not replaceable. You're not expendable. And when I heard that my employees were suffering, that they felt abandoned. He had to pause, emotion tightening his throat. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't fix it personally. Anna's face twisted with emotion. Then, suddenly, she threw her arms around Daniel in a fierce hug. He froze, surprised, then gently hugged her back. Thank you? She sobbed into his shoulder. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Behind her, Marcus started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Sophie joined in, then Carol, then the rest of the staff. The applause built until it filled the entire diner, not polite corporate applause, but raw, cathartic release. Daniel stepped back from Anna, overwhelmed. Several employees were crying now, Carol, Sophie, even the stoic line cook who'd barely spoken. But they were smiling through their tears. We thought no one would believe us, Marcus said, his voice thick. We thought we were stuck. You were never stuck, Daniel said firmly. And you were always believed. I'm sorry it took so long for help to arrive. Margaret stepped forward. We're going to need statements from all of you, voluntary, on your own time, with legal counsel if you want it. This isn't about getting you in trouble. It's about holding Rick accountable and making sure this never happens again. David added, and we're going to make things right. Back pay for stolen wages. Compensation for the privacy violations. Counseling services if you need them. Whatever it takes. Anna wiped her eyes, looking at Daniel with something like wonder. What happens now? To the diner? Daniel looked around at the space, the checkered floor, the worn booths, the counter where he'd first served coffee 15 years ago. Now, he said softly, we rebuild. The right way. For the first time in 8 months, the employees of Miller's Diner smiled like they meant it. The nightmare was over. And the healing could finally begin. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in the same diner, but everything had changed. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. Laughter drifted from the kitchen where Marcus joked with Carol while prepping for the lunch rush. Sophie hummed as she arranged flowers on the tables, a small touch Anna had suggested. The surveillance cameras had been removed, leaving small holes in the walls that Daniel had decided to leave unpainted for now. A reminder. A scar that would heal, but shouldn't be forgotten. The contractor says the new break room will be ready by Friday, Anna said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel. Real chairs this time, not the plastic ones Rick bought at a garage sale. Daniel smiled. How are you feeling about everything? Anna considered the question carefully. She looked different now, well-rested, standing taller, smiling more easily. Honestly? Some days I still can't believe it's real. I keep expecting him to walk through that door. He won't. The restraining order makes sure of that. After Daniel's team had finished their investigation, the evidence had been overwhelming. Rick Lawson was facing 14 criminal charges, including wire fraud, computer crimes, wage theft, and illegal surveillance. The district attorney had called it one of the most egregious cases of employer misconduct she'd seen in 20 years. Rick's lawyer was already negotiating a plea deal. He'd never work in management again. The checks came through yesterday, Anna said. Everyone got them. Marcus cried when he saw his, said it covered 3 months of tuition he'd been struggling with. Daniel nodded. The back pay and compensation had totaled nearly $87,000 across all affected employees. Money stolen through wage theft, forced unpaid overtime, and tip skimming. Daniel had added a 20% premium on top of legal requirements, calling it a dignity restoration fund. His CFO had protested. His accountants had grimaced. Daniel hadn't cared. Sophie's bruises are fading, Anna continued quietly. She told me yesterday that she got them from her ex-boyfriend, not from work. But she stayed quiet about it because Rick made her feel like she couldn't trust anyone. She's in counseling now. Getting help. That's good. Really good. And Carol. Anna's voice caught. Carol brought her granddaughter in last week. Just to show her where she worked. She said she'd been too ashamed before, didn't want her granddaughter seeing her so scared all the time. But now she's proud again. Daniel had to look away, emotion tightening his chest. What about the fired employees? Any word? Tommy came by yesterday. He's working at a restaurant across town, but he wanted to thank you. Said he'd spent months thinking he was crazy, that maybe he really had done something wrong. Anna smiled. He's talking about coming back when we fully reopen. The diner was currently operating on limited hours while renovations continued. Daniel had brought in a temporary manager, a woman named Patricia who'd worked for him for 12 years and had a reputation for empathy and fairness. But it was a temporary solution. Anna, Daniel said carefully, I need to talk to you about something. She tensed slightly, old instincts flickering. Okay. I want to offer you the position of permanent manager for this location. Anna's coffee cup nearly slipped from her hand. What? You're exactly what this place needs. You understand the staff, you know the operation, and most importantly, you have the courage to do what's right even when it's terrifying. Daniel met her eyes. I know you don't have traditional management experience on paper, but leadership isn't about credentials. It's about character. And you've proven yours beyond any doubt. I'm not sure I can. You can. And I'll support you every step of the way. Training, mentorship, whatever you need. Plus a significant raise, full benefits, and profit sharing. Daniel smiled gently. Think about it. No pressure. But I believe in you, Anna. Tears welled in her eyes. Why do you keep doing this? Believing in people everyone else would overlook? Because someone believed in me once, when I was a kid washing dishes and dreaming of something bigger. Because potential isn't about where you start, it's about what you do when given the chance. He paused. And because you saved this place. Without you, none of this would have happened. Those employees would still be suffering, and I would have lost something I care deeply about. Anna wiped her eyes, laughing through tears. Okay. Yes. I'll do it. I'll be your manager. They shook hands, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness he hadn't felt in months. The door chimed. A family walked in, parents with 2 young children. Sophie greeted them with a genuine smile, leading them to a booth. The little girl pointed at the menu, excited. Normal. Human. Good. Mr. Reed? Marcus emerged from the kitchen, still wearing his apron. The new griddle's working perfectly. And I wanted to say. He paused, searching for words. Thank you? For seeing us. For giving a damn when you didn't have to. I'll always give a damn, Daniel said simply. That's not optional. Marcus nodded, emotion working across his young face, then headed back to the kitchen. Daniel walked to the front window, looking out at Millbrook's main street. The town was small, easy to overlook. The people working here were easy to overlook too, waitresses, dishwashers, line cooks. The invisible infrastructure of daily life. But they mattered. They'd always mattered. His phone buzzed, a reminder about the corporate meeting he'd rescheduled twice. The business side of his empire needed attention. But for just this moment, Daniel let himself stand in this small diner, watching Anna train Sophie on new point-of-sale software, listening to Carol's laughter from the kitchen, feeling the warmth of a space that was healing. He'd built 12 diners across 3 states. He'd employed hundreds of people. He'd chased growth and expansion and profit margins. But none of it meant anything if the people were treated as disposable. Anna caught his eye from across the room and smiled, a real smile, unguarded and free. Daniel smiled back. He'd learned something these past weeks, something he'd somehow forgotten in the climb toward success. Loyalty couldn't be demanded or surveilled into existence. It couldn't be extracted through fear. It grew from respect. From dignity. From the simple act of seeing people as human beings worthy of trust and care. Rick Lawson had ruled through fear and control, and he'd built nothing but misery. Daniel Reed chose a different path. It was harder, messier, more expensive in the short term. But watching this diner come back to life, watching these people laugh and heal and believe in themselves again, he knew it was the only path worth taking. The bell chimed as more customers entered. The lunch rush was beginning. Anna moved smoothly into action, greeting them warmly. Marcus called out an order. Sophie poured coffee with steady hands. Miller's diner was alive again. And this time, it would be built on something that lasted: respect, dignity, and the unshakable belief that people, all people, deserve to work without fear. Daniel raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to the staff, to Anna, to second chances and new beginnings. Then he got to work. There were 11 other locations to check on, after all.